There is a resin that bleeds from a tree that grows in the highlands of Ethiopia and Eritrea and Somalia. Twisted bark, almost no leaves. A tree that looks like it has no business being alive. When you cut the bark, the tree bleeds. A thick, pale sap wells up from the wound, and within days it hardens into small tears, pale gold, amber, roughly the size of a thumbnail. Hold one cold in your palm, and it smells of almost nothing. A faint sharpness, something dry and resinous. But when you place it on burning charcoal, the smoke that rises from that small hardened tear is the same smell that 14 cultures on 5 continents across 4,000 years have all agreed is the same thing. The boundary between ordinary air and sacred space. Moses smelled it. Solomon smelled it every single morning of his adult life. An Ethiopian Orthodox deacon smelled it at dawn this morning in a chapel in Jerusalem, in walls built in the 4th century. Tonight I want to tell you what it actually is, what the Bible says it does, and exactly how Solomon used it for 34 years without stopping. And I want to tell you what I understood on a cold morning in Jerusalem, standing in ancient stone before 5 o'clock in the morning, watching a young deacon who was not trying to teach me anything. He was just burning what his teacher had taught him to burn, before the day began. Because the boundary needed to be set before anything else entered. Let me begin with the document. Exodus chapter 30, verses 34 through 38. God speaks directly to Moses, not through a prophet, directly. He gives the formula. Take fragrant spices, stacte, onycha, and galbanum, and pure frankincense, all in equal amounts, and make a fragrant blend of incense, the work of a perfumer. It is to be salted and pure and sacred. The Ketoret, 4 ingredients in equal parts, ground fine, salted, mixed by a master perfumer, burned on the golden altar every morning when the temple lamps were trimmed, every evening when they were lit, twice daily, every day, for 410 years during the temple period. God specifies the formula with the same level of precision he uses for the architecture of the ark. And then, in the very next breath, he adds something extraordinary. Verse 37. Do not make any incense with this formula for yourselves. Verse 38. Anyone who makes incense like it to enjoy its fragrance must be cut off from their people. Cut off from their people. In Hebrew, karet. Karet is the most severe spiritual consequence in the Torah outside of execution, not excommunicated, severed from the covenant people, excised from the inheritance. Why does God impose the harshest non-capital penalty in the Torah on the private use of a fragrance? Because the Ketoret was not a fragrance. God does not forbid useless things. Think about that for a moment. Every time God places a prohibition this severe, it is because the thing being protected carries real power, real consequence, real effect in the spiritual world. The Ketoret was not incense in the decorative sense. It was not perfume. It was a material substance with a spiritual function so significant that God restricted it to one place, one formula, one family of priests, and promised excision from the covenant people to anyone who used it outside that context. That is not the language of fragrance, that is the language of a weapon. Here is the function. Leviticus chapter 16. The Yom Kippur service, the holiest day. The one day the high priest was permitted to enter the Holy of Holies, the innermost chamber, where the ark rested, where the Shekinah dwelt between the golden cherubim. No other person entered this room on any day, and before the high priest crossed that veil, he was required to perform one specific act, Leviticus 16, verse 12. He is to take a censer full of burning coals from the altar before the Lord and 2 handfuls of finely ground fragrant incense, and take them behind the curtain. Verse 13. He shall put the incense on the fire before the Lord, and the smoke of the incense will conceal the atonement cover above the tablets of the covenant law, so that he will not die. So that he will not die. I have read that verse perhaps 1,000 times. It still stops me. The most powerful man in the religious world of ancient Israel. The one person on earth with the authority and the consecration to enter the holiest room in existence. He needed the smoke, not as decoration, not as atmosphere, not as symbolic gesture. He needed the cloud of incense to be physically present, physically thick, between himself and the mercy seat, so that he would not die. The frankincense smoke was a protective boundary layer between a human being and the immediate presence of the divine. The incense was the insulation. The incense was the material thing that held the boundary between mortal and holy. And without it, the most consecrated man in Israel could not enter the most sacred room in the world and survive. Solomon burned this twice daily for 34 years, not for beauty, not for atmosphere, to maintain the boundary, to declare twice every single day, this space is consecrated, the boundary holds, the sacred is being tended. The Talmud remembers this with extraordinary precision. Tractate Yoma, page 53b. When the Ketoret was prepared correctly, the formula exact, the spices in their proper ratio, the smoke rose in a perfectly straight column, straight up, without bending, without drifting. And if it scattered, if it bent sideways, if the column fractured, this was read as an omen. Something in the formula was wrong, or something in the priest's preparation was incomplete. The straight column was the confirmation that the boundary had been correctly set. Tractate Yoma records that the family entrusted with this preparation was the family of Avtinas, one family, generation after generation, transmitting the formula father to son, refusing to teach it to anyone outside the family. Their reason: we are afraid that someone will misuse it. When the temple was destroyed in the year 70 of the Common Era, the Ketoret formula was believed lost. The Talmud records genuine mourning for this, because the straight column of smoke had not been seen since, believed lost. But the tree never moved. This is what I understood in Jerusalem. The Avtinas family's formula, the specific ratios, the salting method, the perfumer's art, may have gone with the temple. But the primary ingredient, the Boswellia resin, the actual tree, that never went anywhere. The trees that bled the raw material for the Ketoret are still bleeding. In Ethiopia, in Eritrea, in Somalia. The species the scholars identify as closest to the temple material, Boswellia carterii, Boswellia papyrifera, are native to the East African highlands. This is not a footnote. The substance that held the boundary between the high priest and the divine on Yom Kippur came from African soil. It still does. The trade routes that carried this resin from East Africa through Arabia and into Israel were active for 3,000 years before Solomon. And the people who have burned it continuously, the Ethiopian Orthodox deacons at their morning liturgies, every day since at least the 4th century, they did not need the Avtinas family. They had the tree. They had the practice. The smoke never stopped rising. Let me tell you about the morning in Jerusalem. I had spent 3 days at the Temple Institute. The scholars who are working to reconstruct every object and every practice of the temple service from the written sources. I had been working through the Ketoret passages in Exodus and Yoma with them, discussing the botanical identification, the pharmacological analysis of galbanum smoke. I had read every commentary that existed. On the 4th morning, I woke before 4. I remembered that the Ethiopian Orthodox priests hold their dawn liturgy at 5 in their section of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Deir es-Sultan chapel on the roof of the main church. I went. I waited in the cold. Just before 5, a young Ethiopian deacon came out, perhaps 25 years old. He had a small charcoal censer on a chain. He lit the charcoal. He waited 2 minutes, and then he placed a few small tears of Boswellia resin onto the surface of the coal. The smoke began almost immediately, and what arrived next was not a concept, not an academic description, the smell itself. Sharp and resinous, slightly bittersweet when cold, but as the heat increased, it opened into something deeper, citrus resin, ancient, alive. The column of smoke rose straight up in the cold, still air, and I stood in those 4th century walls with tears on my face that I did not expect, because I was smelling what Solomon smelled every morning for 34 years. The deacon was not thinking about the Temple Institute 4 kilometers away. He was not performing archaeology. He was burning what his teacher had taught him to burn at the hour his teacher had taught him to burn it. He had learned it from a priest, who had learned it from the priest before him, going back through the Ethiopian Orthodox transmission, some scholars believe, to a period predating even the destruction of the Second Temple. The Beta Israel community, the ancient Israelite presence in Ethiopia, had been burning Boswellia at dawn and at evening, long before Christianity arrived in the 4th century. The Ethiopian Church did not inherit the twice-daily burning from Rome or from Constantinople. It inherited it from people who had never stopped, and that young deacon on the roof had no need of my 30 years of research to confirm that it works. He knew what his teacher had told him. Burn this at dawn. Burn this before sleep. The sacred space holds. That is enough. That has always been enough. Now I want to address something directly. There are people watching this who have been in spiritual battle for a long time, who have prayed, who have fasted, who have attended every deliverance service their church offers, and who are still being pressed, specifically in the bedroom. Night terrors, dream attacks, a wait in the room at 2 in the morning. The bedroom is the most spiritually undefended space in the house. 8 hours every night, unconscious and unguarded. Not praying, not speaking, not declaring anything, just lying still, completely vulnerable. Every tradition recognizes this. The Talmud discusses the specific vulnerability of the sleeping person. The Islamic tradition includes specific supplications to be spoken before sleep precisely for this reason. The West African Pentecostal tradition is explicit about warfare that operates through the night hours, and in every case the understanding converges on a single point. The space needs to be prepared, not just the person, the room itself. Solomon did not prepare only himself to enter the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. He prepared the space first. The high priest did not simply walk in and say a prayer. He filled the room with the boundary smoke before he crossed the threshold. The room was ready first, and then the encounter could happen safely. If you want the 8 hours of unconscious vulnerability in your bedroom to happen inside a spiritual boundary, Solomon's method applies here directly. The same smoke, the same material, the same principle. In your bedroom every Sunday night before you lie down. Why Sunday? This is where almost nobody looks. Solomon divided the priests into 24 divisions. The Mishmarot, the weekly rotation of temple service. 1 Chronicles chapter 24 records the full list. Each division served for 1 week, and the weekly rotation began on Yom Rishon, Sunday, the first day of the Hebrew week. The very first act of the new week's priestly service was the renewal of the incense. The outgoing Mishmar had maintained the incense altar for 7 days. The incoming Mishmar renewed it. Fresh charcoal, fresh Ketoret. The first burning of the new week. Sunday night, the beginning of the first day, was when Solomon's temple reset, when the boundary was renewed for another 7 days. When you burn frankincense in your bedroom on Sunday night, you are not performing an arbitrary ritual. You are doing what the incoming Mishmar did at the beginning of every temple week for 410 years. Sealing the bedroom at the start of the week, not because something went wrong, because the week is beginning and the boundary needs to be set before the week can enter the room unconsecrated. Renewal, not repair. Here is the protocol. Every Sunday night, before sleep. The first step, obtain the correct material. Not synthetic incense sticks, not scented candles, not essential oil. The resin itself. Boswellia resin tears, the hardened sap of the African tree. Small pale gold or amber pieces. Available in Ethiopian grocery stores, Arab markets, Somali shops, African food markets, and specialty health stores. When you hold 1 coal in your palm, it smells of almost nothing. When it is on fire, when the full scent opens, you will know it immediately. The second step, prepare the censer. Buy a small heat-proof bowl or ceramic dish, a piece of self-igniting hookah charcoal or church incense charcoal, a hard, flat, safe surface. Light the charcoal and allow it 2 full minutes to glow, orange and gray-white at the edges. Do not rush this. The coal must be fully lit before the resin goes on. Resin placed on a half-lit coal smolders instead of releasing the full smoke column. The third step, place 2 or 3 resin tears on the glowing coal. The resin begins to melt within 30 seconds. The smoke rises almost immediately. Pale white. Fine. The fourth step, move through the bedroom. Carry the censer slowly to the 4 corners of the room. At each corner, pause. Let the smoke enter the corner. Let it fill the angle. Then move to the doorway. Let the smoke fill the threshold. The fifth step, speak at the doorway. Aloud, not silently, by the authority that God gave to Solomon over every spirit. This bedroom is consecrated. The incense rises before the Lord as it rose in the temple for 34 years. What is unclean cannot remain in this space. What does not belong to God cannot enter this space. This boundary holds through the night and through the week. Speak it with the voice of someone who knows whose authority stands behind the words, not requesting, declaring. The declaration is the act. The smoke is the seal. The sixth step, sit with the censer for 5 minutes. Place it in the center of the room on a safe surface. Sit beside it. Breathe slowly. Solomon's priests remained at the incense altar while the Ketoret burned. They did not light it and walk away. You are doing the same. 5 minutes. Quiet. The smoke rising. The boundary being held in the room around you. The seventh step, and this is the one that matters most. This is not a crisis practice. The Ketoret was not burned when things went wrong. It was burned twice daily because the boundary needed twice daily maintenance. Not repair, maintenance, not firefighting. Lamp tending. Sunday night is not when you use this because something went wrong in the week. Sunday night is when you use this because the week is beginning, and the space needs to be consecrated before the week can come in. The incoming Mishmar renewing the incense, the week beginning under cover, the boundary holding. Let me close with what the morning in Jerusalem finally taught me. I had spent 3 years with every commentary on the Ketoret before that morning, the pharmacological analyses, the botanical debates about which species exactly matched the temple formula, the Talmudic arguments about whether one ingredient could substitute for another in times of shortage. I knew everything about it, except what it smelled like. And when the smell arrived, when the deacon placed 3 tiers of African resin on a charcoal in a cold chapel in Jerusalem before 5 in the morning, I understood something no footnote had given me. The knowledge did not wait for the scholars to find it. The formula was believed lost with the temple, but the tree was still bleeding, the practice was still running, through the hands of Ethiopian priests who did not need the academic reconstruction project, because the practice had never stopped. Through the hands of every grandmother who burned something aromatic before the ceremonies, before the prayers, who did not need a text to tell her that the smoke prepared the space. The knowledge moved where it needed to move. It moved south. It moved to the people who lived closest to the tree, and it stayed there. Burn this at dawn. Burn this before sleep. The sacred space holds. This Sunday night, when the week is beginning and the room is quiet, and you have a piece of charcoal and 2 small tiers of Boswellia resin, do what the incoming Mishmar did. Do what the Ethiopian deacon did this morning before 5 in the cold air of Jerusalem. Let the smoke rise straight. Declare the boundary. Go in peace. Sleep well tonight. Or perhaps don't, now that you know what the smoke is doing while you rest.